As we launch into the New Testament, I wonder if you've ever found yourself asking the question, what happened in that 400-year gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament? You know, after all, 400 years is a long time. 400 years ago, James I was on the throne. So what happened? Well, stay with me for 5 minutes and I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of the intertestamental period. As the Old Testament ends, the empire of Persia is the dominant world empire. It has been the conqueror of Babylon, and it starts to allow the Jewish exiles to return home to Jerusalem. But big changes are about to happen. On the 1st of October, 331 BC, the Persian Empire comes under attack, and the Emperor Darius III rides out with a huge army to meet the armies of Alexander the Great. Now, Darius and the Persian Empire are completely and totally defeated, and on that day, the Empire of Persia ends. Alexander the Great from Macedonia rides across the whole of Persia, right the way over to India, right the way down to Egypt, and forms this enormous empire, the biggest empire to date that the world had ever seen. But Alexander the Great doesn't live that long. He dies while he's still relatively young. But the Greek influence that he brings is going to last for centuries. And remember that the New Testament is going to be written in Greek. This all dates back to Alexander the Great. So as Alexander the Great dies, his empire splits into 4 parts. Now, initially, the rule of Jerusalem is passed over to an empire based in Egypt, ruled by a family called the Ptolemies. And they rule Jerusalem well. Temple life continues. The rituals of the Jewish faith are all allowed to go ahead. But over time, the rule of Jerusalem passes to another Greek empire, this time the Seleucid Empire. Now, these rulers, they were not great at looking after Jerusalem. They didn't let Jewish worship continue. And over time, they started to impose Greek religion to such an extent that they go into the temple and they put up an altar and a statue of Zeus in the very Holy of Holies. But another change is about to happen. 164 BC, there is a revolt of the Jewish people against the Seleucid Empire. A family called the Maccabees rises the people up to become an army and defeats the Greek Empire. And for about 100 years, give or take the odd blip here and there is a significant degree of home rule. Jewish life, temple worship can get going again, and the people start to flourish, at least for a time. But while all this is going on, another power is growing in the background. The might of Rome. Rome started out as a city-state in the middle of Italy in the 8th century, first of all as a republic and then eventually became an empire. And its power grows. Nation after nation fall under the sway of Rome. Greece, Carthage, other places right across the Mediterranean world. And by 63 BC, when Jerusalem falls, the Roman Empire is now the dominant world power. Now, the Romans, they were quite savvy rulers, and what they would often do is put in place puppet kings to rule an area so that it gave the people the feeling that they still had a degree of autonomy. And so the Roman rulers put in Herod the Great as the ruler of Palestine. Now, Herod is the one who rebuilds the temple that is there in Jesus' day. Herod is the one who sets off on all these building projects around Jerusalem and makes Jerusalem quite a magnificent city. But Herod is also the one who is there when the wise men come to visit Jerusalem looking for the infant Jesus, and because of his suspicions puts to death all those babies in a search for the Messiah. What is going on during this period on a more spiritual level? What is going on in terms of God working? Well, it's often said that during this period that God is silent, that God didn't speak. Now, to some extent that is true. There is no fresh revelation from God during this 400 years. But let's not confuse that with God not being at work. You see, there were many faithful men and women during this time who served the Lord, who kept the Jewish faith alive, so that when Jesus is born, there are the likes of Simeon and Anna in the temple ready to receive him, the likes of Mary, Elizabeth, Zechariah, all ready and willing to do God's work during that time. Also during this period, many books are written, books that are found in the Apocrypha. Now, we don't, in our tradition, use the Apocrypha, but some Christian traditions do use it. They don't treat it as the Word of God, but it's almost like an appendix to the Bible, and it serves to give history and a bit of insight into this period of time. Another significant thing that happened during this time was that the Pharisees and the Sadducees start to develop as specific groups. Now, the Pharisees, these were a group of people who became really disillusioned with the Maccabees. They'd hoped that the Maccabees would bring about a real revolution of spirituality and law-keeping and law observance. But as the Maccabees became increasingly corrupt, they turned their backs on them and set up their own groupings. The Sadducees that we find in the New Testament, well, they're a slightly different bunch, again linked back to the Maccabees. They responded in a different way. They thought, well, we need to support this dynasty. We need to keep the Jewish nation independent. And so what they did was became the aristocrats of the day. They became the power wielders in the temple. They took up positions of influence. And when Jesus starts his ministry, we see both the Pharisees and the Sadducees are still there. And they find a common enemy in Jesus. So as the New Testament starts, Rome is the superpower. Herod is the puppet king. The Sadducees and the Pharisees are there in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. Jewish national identity is sort of at fever pitch. There are people praying for the coming of a Messiah. And then Jesus is born humbly in a stable with a few people ready to welcome him. But God's timing, as always, is perfect. The Roman world in which Jesus is born allows the gospel to travel like wildfire right across much of the known world. And it's this gospel that we'll be hearing about in the New Testament. Thank you for watching.